Greetings and salutations, viewers. Welcome to another episode of Game Break. I am coming to you today with another episode of That Old Time Religion. Last time round, we set the stage and found out that one of the religious leaders of Nolans has gone missing. And the other leaders kind of want to find out where he wandered off to, because he was effectively the peacekeeper and kind of kept everything in balance. We have no idea where he wandered off to, if there was foul play involved, or anything really. So, hey, you know what? Let's dive right in, see where we go from here. I know a handful of folks who felt pretty particular about God's will, Mr. Deveneaux, and I'm pretty sure they don't agree with you on just what that means. Then I smiled, turned, and walked away from him, saying over my shoulder, "And I'm pretty sure you don't buy the crap you're selling either." Well, okay, so we can either check out the church or go visit the daughter. I'm going to go with the daughter, as apparently we were supposed to learn previously that she and Mr. Deveneaux kind of have a thing going on. And chances are the father probably did not appreciate that. So, hey, let's go actually talk to her and see what we can learn. What is it about preachers' kids that always put them in the middle of the worst kinds of trouble? Yeah, I know. A pretty dumb question to ask. Truth to tell, Rachel Kellerman was the least like the stereotype I'd ever met. Her brown hair was perfectly coiffed in the latest fashion, and her clothing, while not quite socially elite, was certainly of a style and cut that spoke volumes about the circle she was used to traveling in. She exuded class and poise, with just the right mix of prim and proper presence, and an undertone of pure sex. Then again, maybe she was more a preacher's daughter than I figured on first blush. We met in the sitting room of her very fine townhome, with a pot of tea steeping and tasty little cakes at hand. I had to pass through two solid-looking uniforms to get through the front door, and it was only because Rabbi Saul Koch asked the mayor personally to have the police cooperate with me that I made it this far. There were two more bright and shiny young cops in the back, and a patrol car made a regular pass around the neighborhood. Apparently, the city was taking the Reverend's kidnapping pretty seriously. Sitting with us in the nice little room was a lump of tan slacks and white rumpled shirt, named Hal Blake. He was nervously playing with an unlit cigar, sticking it in his mouth one minute, fidgeting with it in the next. Clearly, Miss Rachel Kellerman wasn't having any smoking in her fine place, which was fine by me. Come on. Anything that made Hal Blake unhappy made my day just a little bit better. Hal was an ex-cop in the way a guy least wants to be. Fired for being on the take, he was accepting bribes from competing crime gangs, and it was making his bosses look bad. Blake went from a disgraceful police career to a fairly dismal PI business. He did have the one advantage of being a really good shot and having a pretty fair rep as a bodyguard, which was how he was making his rent most days. Hal and I got along mainly by avoiding each other like bad diseases, which of course wasn't working out very well today. I chose to ignore him. He chose to glare at me. So, you say you didn't see your father at all the day he disappeared. Is that right, Miss Kellerman? She leaned forward to start fixing herself a cup of tea, letting her blouse open just enough to hint at the rather exquisite décolletage she made such efforts to barely conceal. Mr. Jenkins, I've certainly regaled all of these facts to the police detectives to great exhaustion. Surely you can just read the reports they've taken. I am not doing a southern accent. Not happening. Her genteel southern accent absolutely flowed like honey from her ruby lips, and there was no mistaking the subtle sense of mere toleration of my intrusion in her manner. Nonetheless, she was the perfect hostess, also pouring me a cup of tea and, with a raised eyebrow and a mere nod, figuring out how I liked it. As with all things, straight was fine with me. She then set a tiny little cake on the same saucer as the tea and handed it to me with absolute grace and a fine smile. She didn't offer Hal anything. I just couldn't help myself. I tasted the cake and made a satisfied face, then took a sip of the tea. I hate tea, utterly. I hated Hal more, and the extra heat in his glare made the swill worth swallowing. I set down my saucer and cup. Ma'am, I just want to be sure. According to what I've read, his secretary indicated that you were supposed to meet with him at his office at about 7:30 p.m., after which you were to go have dinner together. Mr. Jenkins, while it's true that we had originally made such plans, he telephoned me and cancelled them. I'm not entirely sure why, mind you, but Daddy has always been a very busy, very involved man. I simply assumed he was called to some other urgent business. I remained here at my home, eating alone that night. Is it possible he's met someone? Someone he's interested in romantically? Mr. Jenkins, she went on, decidedly cooler in her tone, I am not quite sure I understand what you are implying. My daddy loved Mama with every bit of his soul, and I am certain he hasn't so much as thought of another woman in the year and a half since her passing. Hal was still fidgeting, only he wasn't glaring at me so much. Considered this a clue. I'm a real pro that way. Miss Kellerman, I mean no disrespect. I'm just trying to help find your father. Same as the police. Well, I'm sure I have nothing else I can say to help you with this, Mr. Jenkins. I am quite distraught and very tired, and I think I am at the end of my usefulness to you. Sorry to have bothered you. Have a fine day. Well, bless her heart, wasn't she helpful? I put on my hat and showed myself to the front of the house. Hal Blake followed me none too subtly. Why don't you find some cheating creeps to peep on, Harv? This one's out of your ballpark. Better than bringing a football like you to a baseball game, Blake. It wasn't good, but it was all I had, since I was plenty distracted. I'd caught a glimpse of a stack of mail that someone had nudged up against on the way past the little table next to the front room. I'd always had sharp eyes. The day I couldn't see so great anymore would be the day for me to buy a fishing boat and make for the Florida Keys. There'd been one piece of mail I thought very telling, and I meant to find out what it was telling me. It was directly addressed in flowing script to one Rachel Kellerman. The return address, also handwritten, featured one Gospel Devino. Uh-oh. As I made my way down the sidewalk, I spotted two pieces of walking granite matching my pace across the street. Black suits, black shirts, no ties. A nasty X branded on their foreheads. I was just starting to think about which alley to duck down when two more stepped out right in front of me. One pointed and shouted even as the first two broke into a run towards me. So 4 on 1. Not the best of odds. We have come to bear witness. Let's see if I can take these chumps. Nothing for it but to run, or the high ground. Don't they always tell you to go for the high ground? The hell can the high ground be in this respect? So either you take them on, you book it, or jump over them? Climb the wall? What the heck is the high ground? Hey, you know what? Hey, let's find out. What is the high ground? The odds are rarely in my favor whenever I find myself in a fight. What few friends I have in this world tell me it's karma, or all the sins of my past. I think it's just the nature of my business. A lone investigator snooping into the business of powerful people who can afford to hire groups of folks to beat the crap out of me. I could run, but that wouldn't tell me much about these guys, and I had a feeling I needed to know just what I was dealing with. A stand-up fight wasn't a good idea either. I've been known to handle myself well in more than a few one-on-one brawls, but it takes a special kind of stupid to think you can go the distance with 4 sides of beef at once, even if you have some heat. Besides, I didn't like shooting anyone if I didn't have to. Paperwork is a real pain in the ass. Oh yeah, I'm sure all the paperwork of a PI, when you're working with 3 of the most powerful, influential people in New Orleans, I'm sure they care all about the paperwork. You're gonna have to fill it out in triplicate, maybe quadruple for the person you find eventually. I mean, gotta factor that in. Doc Carver was in the big one, and he always talks about taking the high ground when things get dangerous. Seemed like a solid plan this time, so I dove into the alleyway the 2 new arrivals had just left and made for the nearest fire escape. After a bit of jostling with each other, the 4 monsters made their way after me, reaching up even as I was pulling myself to the nearest landing. So far so good, but I was starting to think I needed to elaborate on my plan a bit. After all, once we got to the top, it was pretty much the same story, only now they had gravity to play with when they got their hands on me. There is that. Gravity. See, Doc, I do pay attention sometimes when you start spouting all of that science stuff. Instead of making my way up the ladder to the second landing, I grabbed the underside of it and braced myself just as the first big man made his way near the top and started reaching for me. He was just starting to shout, "We shall bear witness," at me again when I firmly planted both feet square into his pie hole. Oof. Teeth shattered and he lost his grip, plummeting back down the ladder and taking his 3 friends down with him. I slid like a fireman down the ladder after them. The one I kicked was already out. The one right behind him was nearly down for the count. The other 2 were scrambling to their feet, but had managed to grab a brick on the ground and clocked both of them before they got their bearings. I was pretty upset by the fact that I had to hit each of them twice to make it stick. I popped the nearly down one in the back of the head with the now busted brick, then paused to let the shock of the fight wear off a bit while I looked to see if there was any more trouble coming. Once I was satisfied things were done for the moment, I checked out my playmates. Each of them was wearing some kind of really odd medallion around his neck. It was an iron circle with some kind of weird lines on it. I think I'd heard things like this called runes once or twice. I went ahead and took all 4, then made my way out of the alley. The last thing I needed was some wandering patrolman deciding he needed to run me in for questioning. Alright, I can either go talk to Mama Bonte about the medallions, or go to Miss Carmichael. Huh. I'm gonna go down the Mama Bonte route, because there's something about Devino and the goons, and the hell is bearing witness? What are they bearing witness to? If they're all bearing the medallions, it signifies they're part of something, but what? While Miss Carmichael definitely would know, and she's probably the info keeper for Devino, what are the chances that she'll play nice? I already owe favors to Mama Bonte anyway, so hey, what's one more? Well now, Mr. Jenkins, these be real interesting. Talismans they are. Somebody be using them to make men into something else. Something strong, tough, and very loyal to whoever be working the mojo. Mama Bonte was studying the trinkets I've brought her very carefully, and it was clear she was more than a little concerned about what she was seeing. In fact, she looked downright angry. Someone playing with powers they shouldn't be. This be like some very bad black magic I done seen more than once, Harvey. Excuse me. Very bad. Make a person into a thing, take away their light forever. That's pretty bad. Even if you take this off them, they ain't never gonna be the same again. A ghost of what they was, with no hope and no path. Most of them will just find a way to end their life, 'cause they can't see no light without the one who made them like this in the first place. That's some pretty impressive mojo. I grimaced at that. I'd left those guys to wake up and just go look for a way to die. Still, not a whole lot I could do about that now. So how do I deal with this? How do you fight this kind of monster? She looked back at me, and a moment of real concern passed through those deep black eyes. Harvey, you try not to deal with them. You can help it. I started to protest, and she held up a hand. But I know you, Ami, and you gon' finish what you start. Keep one of these, it may help. You get into anything with some of them again. Meantime, I look into what I can do to give you something stronger. Gonna need time though, so try not to get killed before I get done. That was fine advice by me. I was rather fond of not getting killed at all, frankly. I died once. It wasn't a habit I wanted to get into. Okay. If you only give me one choice, you might as well just lead right into it rather than just having me brought out of the game, out of the story temporarily, even if it's a fraction of a second, to have to click on the one option and say, okay, I guess we're going to the church now to deal with Secretary Info Lady. There's just something about blondes. Mary Carmichael had that peaches and cream complexion you hear women going on and on about. Long, wavy hair that flowed around her face as she bent down over her desk, looking at some paperwork. A figure that went a few degrees shy of plump in every perfect way you might hope to find in a farmer's daughter on a cold and rainy night out in the middle of the sticks. This was not the kind of woman I expected to be working as a church secretary, but I always welcomed pleasant surprises. My life was entirely too full of the other kind these days. I'm sorry, Mr. Jenkins, but the last appointment I have on record for the Reverend was with his daughter, Rachel. She was supposed to meet him at 7:30 p.m. here to discuss some matters of their estate, and then they were to go out to dinner. It was well past my normal quitting time, so I wasn't here when... She paused, and tears started to well up in her robin egg blue eyes as she looked at me. Oh, I'm so sorry. I just can't imagine why anyone would do this to him. He's such a kind and giving man, so full of the Spirit of the Lord. She fingered her rather ostentatious gold and diamonds cross with worry. I moved past her and into the Kellerman's inner office, which was an absolute wreck. The two flatfoots who'd led me into the place were hovering over by the other door. mostly enjoying the view of Mary Carmichael. Neither had the look of future detectives about them. I looked at the scene and I immediately figured a few things out. Someone either wanted to make this look particularly violent, or just really didn't care what got messed up when they came for Reverend Paul Kellerman. Despite the mess, though, there was no sign of blood. Although someone did a fine cleanup job, or the preacher didn't put up much of a fight. The place had been dusted for prints, of course, but as many folks as came and went through here, that didn't seem likely to turn up much. As I continued slowly wandering around his office, I asked Miss Mary, "Did the Reverend have any enemies, ma'am? Was he in any kind of feud or quarrel you know about?" "I tell you, Mr. Jenkins, Paul was one with the Lord. He truly loved all of his brothers and sisters in Christ." I began to get the feeling, from the look in her eyes as she talked about him, that perhaps she'd wanted to know more of that love than most. From what I'd heard, however, the man had been utterly faithful to his wife even after she died. Even so, Miss Carmichael, men like the Reverend can stir up people who don't necessarily believe in what he does, right? I gave her a steady, reassuring gaze, wanting her to believe I really was here to help. Apparently, I passed some kind of test, because she glanced nervously at the two donut eaters before making her way conspiratorially over to me. In a much quieter voice, she said, "Well, now, he did have some real concerns about that new fellow with the tent revival that recently arrived in town. The one they call Brother Gospel Divine." "The very one, Mr. Jenkins. Their one and only meeting did not go well at all, I'm sad to say. Brother Divine seemed to think that Reverend's overly tolerant nature towards the other religious groups was a sure sign that the apocalypse would begin right here in New Orleans. I mean, the very idea." She looked generally outraged, clearly remembering the incident. This dame had it bad for the Reverend, that much was certain. "Is there anything else you can think of, ma'am? Anything at all?" "Well, I don't like to start rumors, Mr. Jenkins." "Mary, his life is clearly in danger. They're not rumors if they are clues I can use to save him." She seemed to grasp that. Her eyes got wide, then narrow. "Well, Mr. Jenkins, it's just that I kept noticing how that Gospel Divine and Paul's daughter, Rachel, kept looking at each other. It seemed pretty certain to me that they knew each other from somewhere. There was a lot more going on there than the Reverend knew. I had meant to warn him, but it's just not that easy to bring a thing like that up, you understand." I nodded. "Thank you, Miss Carmichael. You've been very helpful." Seeing as I already knew that information inadvertently by going in the wrong order last episode. Just as I turned to leave, I noticed 2 coffee mugs on the desk. One, which seemed likely to be the Reverend's from where it was lying on the ground, had a strange stain in the bottom. I grabbed it, took a sniff, and then scraped out some residue and put it in a small metal vial I keep for such occasions. The other, mostly still full of coffee, had lipstick on it. And the lipstick just so happens to match the lipstick worn by the Reverend's daughter, Rachel Kellerman. I took the stuff I scraped out of the Reverend's mug over to a friend of mine's shop. Doc Carver's got all the science learning I could ask for, and fortunately, he's gotten around to forgiving me for the last time I'd involved him in a case. He checked it out, and sure enough, my hunch was right. Poison. The kind that puts a man out for hours. So, the plot thickens. So, It's looking like it's leading more and more towards Rachel Kellerman and Brother Gospel Divine coordinating a kidnap of her father, potentially for the estate, and to get him out of the way, because why? Sorry. Allergies. There's got to be more to just getting the estate. That's too shallow of a scam for something this scale. There's gotta be more to it. It didn't look like I was going to get my second interview with Rachel Kellerman. The front door was busted wide open, half off its hinges. The two uniforms were lying dead on the stoop. One's neck was broken. The other's face was smashed in. I could still smell the gunpowder. They'd gotten shots off. Apparently, it hadn't mattered much. I pulled my .38 anyway and went inside Rachel's place, looking down the hall. I could see the wide open back door, where the other two cops were all mangled up. The whole place was a trashed mess, and the power was out. I lit a candle and started looking around some more, hoping against hope I might find someone still breathing here. I found him in the busted form of Hal Blake. His back had been broken like a twig. His eyes were bulging from the excruciating pain, and blood was pouring out of him from places it shouldn't. His gun, clearly empty, lay nearby, and it looked like he was fiddling with that same cigar with his one good hand. The other was obviously paralyzed, along with most of his body. He eyed me warily at first, but when he realized who it was, he gave a slight wheezy chuckle that erupted into a spasm of painful coughing. I knelt down next to him and looked him eye to eye. We both knew he wasn't going to make it. Hey, Harvey. Back to see if you could score with that sweet frail. Jesus, Hal. What the hell happened? As I asked, I took the cigar, lit it for him, and stuck it in his mouth. I hated the guy, but this was an awful way to go, and he deserved a last smoke, at least. He inhaled deeply, coughed some more blood up. I was afraid I was going to lose him before he could tell me what happened. Then he looked at me with something that approached regret. Never been any good, Jenkins. We both know that. But you gotta know I tried. I tried to fight those lummoxes off. I nodded, wanting him to continue. Divine hired me specific to watch after her. Said he had a particular caring for her and wanted to make sure he had eyes on her all the time. All I had to do was report back to him about anything that happened or anyone she talked to. He looked away for a moment. I knew that meant me, too. Paycheck's a paycheck, Hal. No hard feelings. No, that was me. I actually meant it, too. He was in enough pain. So, tell me how this happened to you. He actually looked back at me with gratitude in his eyes and took another drag of the cigar. After some more coughing, he went on. I could tell I was losing him, though, and he got that ashen, pale look in his face. These giant mooks come busting in the place, screaming something about bearing witness or something. They tore through the flatfoots like they were nothing, and emptied my piece into the first one in the room. He staggered and fell back, but he didn't fall. He didn't fall, Harvey. He clutched at my jacket, desperation in his eyes. What kind of monster doesn't fall when you shoot it like that? I couldn't answer him. There were too many in the world like that, to be sure. He started to fade away, eyes closing slowly as he took another deep puff of his cigar. They grabbed the dame. I tried to fight him and grab her back. One picked me up and broke me across his knee like I was kindling. Then you showed up. He smiled slightly. At least I got to go out like a hero, for a change. That was the end of Hal Blake. I was thinking of writing a letter to his family when I heard the heavy breathing and heavier footsteps. We have come to bear witness. And I think we're going to have to find out just what witness they are bearing to next time. The plot thickens, so it seems at the moment like the Reverend is still alive. Because the poison wasn't lethal, it just knocked him out, so they could probably transport him safely. If the daughter did it, then he wouldn't suspect anything, he wouldn't have given up, he wouldn't have fought, he wouldn't have done anything suspicious. But why? Why are they taking him out of the picture? What are they trying to get from him? If they're trying to get control of him, would that then lead to control of the peace, or not peace as the case may be, of the other leaders in New Orleans? If you rile them up and disrupt them enough, Devono could come in with his thugs that apparently you can't take down, and do what? What is the endgame? We're gonna have to find out next time. As always, thank you for joining me. Go hit that subscribe button, click that thumbs up or thumbs down, either way, depending on how you thought this episode went. And go check out some of the other fantastic things that we have going on in our channel, like BioShock Infinite, which Will is covering at the moment, and some of the other visual novels that we've gotten in our backlog. And I have another good dozen or so in the wings after we wrap this one up. I'm pretty confident this is going to wrap up next episode. I feel like we're getting pretty close to the big reveal and the climax, so we'll see you all next time.